Good morning, everyone. I'm Associate Professor Dr. Kamarul from Abu Dhabi University, and I'm going to go through several topics on organizational behavior. And when doing so, I'll be talking about how each of these topics can be relevant to your potential doctoral research topic. So this is one of the earliest chapters on foundations of individual behavior. In this chapter, what would be relevant would be, how, if you're looking to do a research in person environment fit, how people fit into the work environments, then how you measure people could be relevant in your research topics. Even if you're not doing on person environment fit, it'd be useful to know that how can we define people, or which aspects of people can we focus on if we want to include them as a variable in your research. Biographical characteristics, these are normally in a questionnaire, and you've often seen research where, for example, they've seen that there's a positive correlation between age and job satisfaction. As people get older, they become more satisfied. So these examples of how age can be a variable that is examined in relation to any job outcome variable like job satisfaction or performance. Similarly, gender. There are lots of gender studies. I have a couple of studies published, which you can get on the internet, about the so-called gender differences between males and females in terms of how they communicate, how they behave. So that's also another research topic. Now generally these topics by themselves, then they're okay for undergraduate level. They might be okay for a master's level, but obviously at the doctoral level, you need to look beyond these variables. Now, another aspect of the person that you can look at is the ability. And often when you're looking at ability of people at the workplace, it's often the intellectual ability rather than the physical ability. So how do you define mental ability or intellectual ability? What's another commonly used term for that? Well, intelligence is a commonly used term that is used to describe the mental ability. And how do you define intelligence? There are many ways of defining intelligence. One such person by the name of Thurston, Thurstone, Thurston, according to him, he said there are 7 dimensions of intelligence. There are number aptitude, how good you are with numbers; verbal comprehension, how good are you in understanding when you hear somebody saying something; perceptual speed, how good you are at recognizing or seeing the whole picture even though you're given insufficient information. I've looked at perceptual speed in my thesis, by the way. Inductive and deductive reasoning, the logical process that happens with people. Spatial visualization, like how good people are in directions. Like for example, if I were to ask you in which direction is a lion, can you point now? So if you point in the right way, that means you have got good spatial visualization. You're able to memorize the location of places. And lastly, memory. So according to Thurston, intelligence can be measured by 7 dimensions. Are there alternative views to this? Well, according to Cattell, Cattell, he says that there are 2 main dimensions of intelligence. There's fluid intelligence, something that you're born with, and crystallized intelligence, something that you pick up through education and experience. In my research, I looked at Cattell's method, which is looking at fluid intelligence, basically fluid intelligence. The inborn ability of people that doesn't change with age, maybe changes later on when they're very old, but basically it's the ability to understand or grasp new information. That's what intelligence is. So for example, like for those who are looking at leadership, you might want to see that, you might want to examine intelligence, mental intelligence, as a component of leadership effectiveness. In fact, there's some studies that have examined intellectual ability, mental intelligence, and did a correlation with a manager's performance. And they actually found that the correlation or the relationship between mental intelligence and salesperson's performance or sales manager's performance is not as strong compared to the emotional intelligence, something that we'll be talking about later. So that's intellectual ability. Physical ability, more to do with perhaps certain occupations like policemen, firemen, sports athletes. Physical ability would be more relevant. But since here I think no one is doing it in the sports area, so it's not relevant. Ability, job fit. This is one of the components of person-environment fit. Person-environment fit, you can look at the relationship between the person and the organization, that's the highest level, or the person and the job, which is slightly lower level. And in relation to the person to the job, there's one subcomponent which is the abilities that are required in the job must be matched with the abilities that the person has. So for example, if the job is in accounting, what kind of abilities do you think are relevant for that job in accounting? Maths, so the numerical ability, if you remember the earlier slide, the numerical ability would probably be the most relevant ability for the ability job fit in an accountant. What about the lawyer? Which one of the, if I go back, the verbal comprehension, right? Would be most relevant for the job of a lawyer. So if a person if a lawyer has got high verbal comprehension and is a lawyer, chances are he'll be a more effective lawyer compared to if he has, or he or she has, lower verbal comprehension. So that's an example of person-environment fit right there. Ability, job fit, one of the components. So that's on abilities and intelligence and so on. Now there's this other sub-area which is on learning. And learning here is different from like learning or studying in a course. Here learning is referring to any relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of an experience. So for example, just say for example, there is a lecturer who is very strict on punctuality. So if students come in late in a class, the lecturer minus 1 or 2 marks for lateness. He actually deducts marks. So what will happen is that in the next class, that student probably will not be late because that student learned from the unpleasant experience of being late. He was punished. So the next class, that student will not be late. So that's an example of learning. And there is, again, another body of literature that looks at learning. Sometimes they look at operant conditioning, and it is basically the type of conditioning in which designed voluntary behavior leads to reward or prevents a punishment. in the context of human resource policies again, you've heard of the famous carrot and stick approach. Carrot is a reward. So if somebody does something good, you give the reward. If somebody does something that they're not supposed to in the organization, then they get some kind of punishment. So it happens in all fields. It happens. The original study was among dogs, animals, and I'm not saying that everything that's done on animals are applicable to humans, but in this case, some of the principles actually do apply. In that people's behavior can be molded according to the rewards and the punishments, and that's an example of how people learn. Another aspect is social learning theory. People can behave according to, or people can, they appreciate what is correct or incorrect behavior simply by observing the people around them, the society that they grew up in. So for example, in the society in the Middle East, certain things which are okay in the West are probably not all right here in the Middle East. For example, especially in relation to clothing. So if one grows up in the Middle East, you'll be accustomed to wearing clothes in a certain way. Whereas if you grow up in the West, then you'll be accustomed to wearing clothes in a different way. So that's learning through observation of the people around you. Similarly, when you go to a particular organization, you probably realize that the behavior of the people in the new organization could be, not necessarily, but could be different from people in the previous organization. So for example, if in the previous organization people could be dressed casually and quite relaxed, but in your new organization people are very formal, dressed formally, and are very formal and strict in their conversations, then you would probably learn the new behaviors in your new workplace. So you will actually either learn the new behaviors and adapt, or if you carry on in your old behaviors, you'll find that you'll probably be asked to change your behavior or leave. Okay, and these are just the other. There's this continuous reinforcement, intermittent reinforcement. These are the things which might be relevant in the area of in the methods of shaping someone's behavior. But any one of you are doing anything in this area? Anything at all? If not, then I just go on to the next topic.
Yeah.
This next chapter is probably, the chances of some of you out there using this in your research is quite high, I would say. Especially if we're looking at if you're doing a study on organizational behavior, looking at a person, then chances are you will have to know about personalities. If you're looking at leadership behaviors, it would be tied to personalities, I would say. So for those of you who are doing in that area, you can do a literature review on personalities and leadership styles. The earlier studies look at how certain personalities are more productive. For example, studies done in the 1980s, they have found that if you have a certain behavior like extroversion meaning that you spend a lot of time socializing, these people are normally better salespeople. Studies done in the late 1980s, I would say. So let's carry on with this topic. What is personality? Now, there are many definitions of personality out there, but my favorite one, which I've taken from somewhere, I can't remember, is this. Is the relatively stable set of psychological traits that distinguish one person from another and which can help explain behavior. Let me break down that rather long definition into parts and explain each part to you. Relatively stable. So personality is relatively stable, that means it doesn't change, compared to attitudes. Attitudes is like your opinion about something or someone. So for example, attitudes towards this university. It might be good in one day, and then the next day you find it's not quite what you think. Or it could be the reverse. You might think it's not good, and then the next day you might think it's actually great. But personality is relatively stable during your adult life. When you're an adult, if you are what you are and you remain, the tendency is that you remain very much like that for the major part of your adult life. Unless, of course, a major life event comes in and changes you. So if you're an extrovert, a sociable person, then chances are you are an extrovert or a social person for many years to come. So that's what we mean by relatively stable set of psychological traits. These are inside, like almost like a programming within you. And that distinguish one person from another. So that means one person could be an extrovert, another person could be an introvert, the opposite. A person who's quiet, a person who likes to spend time by themselves. And which can help explain behavior. Now, personality can help explain behavior, but what it cannot do, what it can't do is to predict behavior with 100% accuracy. Why? Because personality is not the only determinant of behavior. There's this other determinant of behavior, which is the environment. That's why we have person-environment fit. It's not just one factor, it's two factors. And if you look at the history of PE Fit, or before PE Fit became popular, the psychologists, the personality psychologists, they are saying, no, personality is important. Personality predicts behavior. You look at the person's personality to determine behavior. But there's another group of psychologists, the environmental psychologists, who say that you can't look at the personality, you look at the environment. Because their argument is that the same person can behave differently if you put them in different environments. So just like the same person will behave differently in a mosque compared to on a football field.
This is logic.
The behavior. So, but in truth is that it's a combination of the two. For many years there was this debate between the personality school and the environmental school. But in truth it's the opposite. Because if you look at it, yes, the same person will behave differently in different behaviors. But in that football field, the person who will be screaming out the most, the loudest, is probably the extrovert. The introvert will probably make some sounds, but it will not be as loud as the extrovert. And similarly in a mosque, when you're not, during Friday prayers, when you're not supposed to be talking, the person who is talking is probably the extrovert, because they can never shut up. So even in the mosque, and you're not supposed to, they're even talking. But of course, they talk in whispers. So it's never one, it's never just the person, it's never just personality, it's never just the environment, but often the combination between the two, and often the interaction between the two, that can help predict the behavior more accurately. So let's look at personality first of all. And personality, where does it come from? It comes from mainly not mainly, it comes about 30%, and again the figures are debatable here, comes from the genes, which is from the parents, and the balance comes from the environment, which is the environment that the person grew up in, which partly could be from the parents as well. But it can also be from the society, school, and television, and now you have the internet. And personality changes until, according to Western studies, up to when somebody is around 14 years old. But I suspect in the Asian countries, it will stabilize at a later age, maybe around 20. So personality in the adult life will become stable. When they're children, personality is changing. So when you are doing a study on adults, sending out personality questionnaires, there's a high chance that the personality is stable. And if you distribute the questionnaires a year later, chances are that person will have the same personality because personality is stable in the adult life. So how do you measure personality? There are many questionnaires out there. The most accessible, I think, is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI for short. It is readily available. Obviously, but it's not free, unfortunately. There are courses that you can go for, which certifies you as MBTI, what was the name? A person who's authorized to distribute MBTI questionnaires and do the analysis. So it's available out there. You just have to attend the course, pay some money, and then you get a certification which allows you to use the MBTI questionnaire in your research. You don't have to be a psychologist, unlike some other psychometrics which only a psychologist can use. The MBTI, you don't need to be a psychologist. You attend the course, get your certification, and you can use. But each time you use, of course, you have to make some payment. MBTI, what it does, it measures people according to 16 personality types or categories. And so you could have extroverted or introverted, sensing or intuitive. Sensing is a person who's, relies on information to make judgments, and intuitive is people who uses gut feelings, like intuition, to make decisions. Again, thinking or feeling, somebody who uses logic to make decisions, or people who are very emotional when making decisions. And perceiving or judging. Now, the word perceiving or judging is a bit misleading, I would say. Judging here actually is not about judging others. It's more about being very organized in terms of your time. So, example, if you are somebody, what are you going to do in next weekend? The person will say, okay, on Friday morning I'm going to do this, Friday afternoon I'm going to do this, Friday night I'm going to do this. Very detailed like that, then they are a judging kind of person. Whereas perceiving, the person will say, what are you going to do tonight? I say, no idea, I just go with the flow. That's a perceiving guy who has a diary but it's all blank. They like to go with the flow, and they don't like to have rigid plans. So if you fill up, when you fill up the MBTI, you will get one of 16 possible types. So example, the first type, you could be an ESTP. That's type, first type. The second type you could possibly have is ESTJ. And the next type it could be ESFP or ESFJ, and so on. So that's why you have the 16 types. So the advantage is that there are 16 different categories. So that's probably enough to type people. But the disadvantage is that, according to this questionnaire, you're either an extrovert or an introvert. There's no middle ground, there's no extreme extrovert or moderately extrovert. It's either extrovert or introvert, you know. So that's one of the major challenges of this questionnaire, because some people are somewhere near the middle line, you know. Some people are extreme extroverts. You can never get them to shut up. But some people are mildly extrovert. And I think there's a difference between the two. But MBTI doesn't make that distinction. So that's one of the objections to the MBTI. And so is there a questionnaire that solves that problem? There is another one, which is the 16 PF. Now, the unfortunate, the good, let me start with the good. The good thing is that a person can have scores for each of the 16 traits. They have scores from 1 to 10 for each of the 16 traits. Example, for trait number 1, reserved versus outgoing. Say if they've got a score of 1, that means they're very reserved. If they get a score of 10, that means they're very outgoing. If they get a score of 5, that means they're quite neutral, in between reserved and outgoing. So you can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 possible points to be along that scale. And for the next one, intelligence, affected by feelings, you have numbers for each and every one of them. So it's a lot more than 16 types. And that's the strength of this scale. There's a lot more flexibility, a lot more dimensions, and you need more dimensions to describe, because people are fairly complex. When people fill up this questionnaire, they are probably average on a lot of these, but they're extremes either side for a few of these traits. So you're able to capture that. And in 16 primary traits, you can even have another 5 secondary traits calculated from the 16. So all in all, you've got 21 different measures of personality. And this is a questionnaire which I use for my PhD, strongly recommended by my supervisor. It's devised by a person by the name of Cattell, C-A-T-T-E-L-L, and it's known as 16PF, personality factor, for short. Now, before you get all excited, unfortunately, this questionnaire, it requires a person with a psychological background to use.
So when you count them, you are putting them at 16 or as double?
There's a questionnaire. Are they 16 or is what?
No, there are 16
Yes.
parameters, okay?
16 dimensions.
Yeah, but you are putting the verses also. The
Putting
verses.
The verses, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
So for example, relaxed versus tense, a person could be getting a score of maybe 2, which means they're very relaxed, or the person might get 8, which is a very tense. And for each of these, you have a score.
There is a scale, correct?
There. So you could be 2 here, you could be 5 here, you could be 8 here, you could be 2 again here, you know. So if you're 2, that means you're more on this side. If you're 8, it means you're more on this side. So you will have a description for each of the 16 traits. And that's what makes it stronger.
So that's what it's.
So you'll be like this is like one dimension. You're either here, this side, or you're this side, or you're somewhere in the middle. So it's impossible to be both.
So it's supposed to be 32
In my research, I basically looked at which of these traits are related to satisfaction when people are placed in small groups compared to larger groups. So for example, I found that outgoing people, they are more satisfied if they are working in larger groups with more people compared to smaller groups. And those who are reserved, are also more satisfied if they are working in small teams or even working alone compared to if they're working in the larger teams. So that's how we make use of this personality questionnaires to first of all measure the person and then to see the relationship with job outcomes and to see whether they are whether they're satisfied if they're placed in certain kinds of work environments, like team size is a work environment that I examined. Is that the only work environment that you can examine? No, of course, you can look at many things like bureaucracy, the cultural aspects, like is it a lot of bureaucracy or is there a lot of uncertainty, that kind of thing.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yeah.
How do they decide which goes in the left and which goes in the left?
Another one which probably is quite accessible as well is the Big Five model. This is something that you might want to look at as well. The Big Five model, the beauty of it is that it's quite popular in research. You key in the Big Five in your search engine, you'll find many research on this topic. Some of my MBA students have also used the Big Five model in their research. So the Big Five model measures people according to 5 personality traits. So according to the Big Five, we don't need 16. We can measure people according to 5 traits. And these 5 traits have been shown to be correlated with satisfaction and performance at work. So let's look at the 5 dimensions. First one, extroversion, which we've talked about. Somebody who is sociable, gregarious, and assertive. The second one is agreeableness. Somebody who is good-natured, cooperative, agreeableness and cooperative, and trusting. Conscientiousness. Somebody who is responsible, dependable, persistent, and organized. Openness to experience, somebody who's imaginative, artistic, sensitive, and intellectualism. And lastly, emotional stability, someone who's calm, self-confident, and secure, as opposed to nervous, depressed, and insecure. So the studies have shown that these, some of these personality traits are linked to performance at work. Of the 5, which one do you think is probably the most relevant or the most strongly related to work performance?
Openness to experience.
Emotional.
Openness
Yeah.
to experience.
Okay, you have openness to experience,
Emotional.
emotional stability,
Consciousness.
and what? Conscientiousness. Yeah. Okay, if you were to have a subordinate, which of the 5 traits do you feel is most important for you?
Agreeableness.
Yeah, probably agreeableness, because yes, boss, you're right, boss. Yeah? But you also want somebody who is conscientious. Right? When you give them a task, it gets done. You don't have to keep checking up on them. So conscientiousness is probably one of the, I think according to studies, or using the Big Five model, they've shown that the conscientiousness people are the ones that there's the strongest relationship with performance at work. Because basically you can rely on them. When they say I'll do it, that means they'll do it. Yeah. But who came up with the most famous people are, I'll write this down, McRae and Costa. There are several people also that have taken on this model, but the originators or the most popularly referred to authors are McRae and Costa, or Costa and McRae. if you're looking for personality, I think that's a good source to look at, how to measure personality. And you don't have to take all these courses to be able to use that questionnaire. Yes, agreeableness in certain cultures, I would say, right? In certain cultures where a person should not go against the boss, then agreeableness is very important for survival in that organization. So this is another aspect of person-environment fit. You have the culture in that organization where there's zero tolerance for objection. You cannot say anything, you cannot disagree with the boss. Then highly agreeable people will probably be the ones who survive in that organization. People who can never keep their mouths closed and always voice their dissenting views or opposing views, these people probably will not last long in that organization. So you can see that perhaps people who are disagreeable in that organization, there's probably a high intention to resign because they don't feel, they don't fit, they don't see themselves as fitting in the organization. Openness to experience, it depends. In some organization, openness to experience is an asset. For example, a young startup company, you need to be open to experience because you'll be doing things which probably no other organization is doing, and you need to do that to survive. But if you're working in an organization that is very bureaucratic, relies mainly on rules and procedures, very much like a government organization, then perhaps openness to experience will be a liability. You don't want somebody who's too imaginative or too creative. And then emotional stability. Some of you mentioned emotional stability. Yes, there are studies that have shown that there's a relationship between emotionally stable people and performance and effectiveness as sales managers. In fact, the term emotional intelligence. I remember in the late 1990s when my classmate who was doing a PhD in finance, he was very excited and he said to me, "Hey, you should check out this new construct called emotional intelligence." And honestly, when I looked at the questionnaires that were purporting to measure emotional intelligence, I said, this is nothing new. And this is, in fact, is emotional stability. So I would say that emotional intelligence has its roots in the variable of emotional stability. And this was dating way back. So it's nothing new. But Goldman, the person who popularized emotional intelligence, he made the model a bit more sophisticated and wrote a book on it and had questionnaires and courses on it. And he coined the term emotional intelligence. But if you look up in the internet, I think there's a debate about whether emotional intelligence is actually intelligence or not. But certainly emotional stability has been shown to be very relevant in certain jobs. For example, managerial jobs is important. Jobs having high risk, you need to have people high in emotional stability. Change management issues. In organizations that are undergoing change, you've got to have people who are calm, self-confident, and secure. While in the turbulence, they are still feeling calm, self-confident, secure. Because if you put neurotic, nervous people in there, it will not work. So people with low emotional stability in organizations which are undergoing restructuring change, they will not be satisfied. They will always be thinking that their jobs are on the line, they're going to be dismissed at any moment, and so on. So Big Five model, as I said, I strongly recommend that you look at that, especially if you are looking into aspects of measuring the person, whether in the context of leadership, whether in the context of groups or teams, whether in the context of satisfaction. One of the previous students in the last class, he was doing on supply chain. His thesis was on supply chain, but as I'm talking about this, he said to me, "Doctor, now I know what to do for my first assignment." He says, "I'm going to tie personality to the supply chain model, and I'm going to say that distributors at each phase will require a different personality." So that's how you can tie in different parts of OB to another topic, like supply chain. And it enriches the thesis. It gives a further depth to the thesis rather than just looking at the normal supply chain model. So he's looking in from a new angle, from the personality angle. So that's what you can. So as and when I'm talking about these personality or whatever topics that I'm talking about, think about how you can use each of these topics in your current research to give it more depth. And okay, going to end shortly here. Now, so far we've looked at what you call multi-trait models, personality questionnaires that examine or attempt to describe people according to a set of personality traits. Can you measure people according to just one trait? Well, these personality theories do. Locus of control, they measure people according to their locus of control. And I'll talk about that in just a short moment. Machiavellianism, again, looking only at Machiavellianism. Self-esteem, only looking at self-esteem. Self-monitoring, only looking at self-monitoring, and so on. So let me just talk about this one, locus control. What is locus control? And it's a personality trait. It's a personality trait. The degree to which people believe that they are masters of their own fate. And you have two extremes. One extreme, you have internals, individuals who believe that they control what happens to them. And the other extreme are externals, people who believe that what happens to them is controlled by outside forces such as luck or chance. So, when you ask people, why are you doing this? If the person says, I chose this because blah, 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 chances are they are more internal. Whereas if they said, I had no choice, the key was I had no choice or I was forced to, then chances are they're more external. So, and again, this concept of this locus of control, you can examine them from the point of leadership, or rather followership. Why some people are better followers than others. Or you can look in terms of the change management, or in terms of whether they fit in a certain culture. Let me ask you this question. Supposing a very bureaucratic culture, all these rules and all that, there's no scope for discretion. Which of the two we think will fit better in a bureaucratic organization? External or internal? External, right? Because these are the people who say, okay, you tell me what to do, I'll do it, But the internals say, no, I don't want to do this, I want to do this. But you can't. No, I want to do this. And then they got a lot of problems. So internals probably are better working in their own organizations, where they make their own rules. Of course, there's still some rules, the governmental rules, the law and all that, but other than that, they make their own rules. So internals probably would be better working in their own organizations, whereas externals are probably better working in organizations that that fit, that have all these rules and regulations. Again, you might want to think about how these locus control can apply to your various research topics. Another personality trait that you can look at is Machiavellianism. It's basically whether a person is willing to do whatever it takes in order to get what they want. That's another personality trait. Self-esteem is the degree to which a person respect or like themselves. Self-monitoring is about how flexible a person is in changing their behavior according to the situation. My guess is that people who are high self-monitors, they probably are the most flexible and are able to fit in different environments compared to somebody who is low on self-monitoring. Risk-taking, a high risk taker or low risk taker or moderate. And personality type A, type B. Remember when I mentioned that in the Myers-Briggs type indicator, you got 16 types, which are, I suppose, adequate, but not that many. Well, the type A, type B is even worse. It's only 2 types. So it's rarely used nowadays. And the final one, this is the Holland's typology, or sometimes called Holland's hexagon. And this is the only personality theory that directly tries to compare the personality of the person and match it to a certain category of occupations. So when a person fills up the Holland's questionnaire, they might be in one of the 6 types. So they might be, say for example, a realistic person. Another person could be social. You can only be one type as your primary category. And then if you are a realistic person, the suitable jobs according to Holland are mechanic, drill press operator, assembly line worker, or farmer. Basically the kind of occupations where people deal with tangible items, things that they can touch, rather than conceptual ideas. So if you are investigative, you're probably like an investigator, news reporter. Social, you're probably like a social worker. Conventional, the appropriate occupations are like accountant, bank teller. Enterprising, examples of suitable occupations are like lawyer or small business manager or entrepreneur, I suppose. And artistic, the suitable occupations like music, musician, artist, interior decorator, and so on. That's the strength of Holland's method, is that it's the only theory that directly tries to match the personality to occupations. The other personality theories like MBTI or 16PF, the primary objective is to measure personality. Although in the manual, they do say that, well, these certain personalities, they are more suitable for these kinds of work and so on. But they don't directly compare in the way that Holland does. So Holland is, the plus side is Holland is bold enough to do that. The negative part of it is that, some of the categorizations, you could see potential objections to that, right? For example, let's see the lawyer here. It's classed under enterprising. So that means if you want to be a lawyer, then you have to be an enterprising person. Well, yes, but it all depends on what kind of lawyer you are, because in the field out there are 3 main kinds. I'm not talking about good, bad. I'm talking about the kinds of occupation, the kinds of specialty. So there are lawyers who go to court, defend people on criminal trials. I would say that for that kind of lawyer, investigative is probably more appropriate. Yeah? And then there's the lawyer that all they do is doing the sale and purchase and housing loans. They call it conveyancing lawyer. And that would be conventional, rather, be more appropriate. So enterprising perhaps for the, I don't know, for the small business, the lawyer in a small firm, they have to be enterprising. So you can see that the objections to the way in which Holland categorizes these occupations, because often within occupations there are subcategories, and these subcategories could fit in other personality types. And also, if you do enough research, you will find that there are many studies published out there that fail to support Holland's model. And that's why initially when I was doing the person environment fit, I asked my supervisor, why don't we just use Holland's model? It matches personality and jobs like that. Why don't we do it? And my supervisor was against it. And at that time he didn't explain it to me in detail, but I just took his advice on the faith of it. But subsequently I found out that it's a good thing that I didn't insist on using the Holland's model, because there are many studies that have failed to support Holland's model. So there's something faulty with that. Not to say that all studies fail to support. No, there are some studies that supported Holland's model. In fact, I did a study on army personnel, and I found that people who are realistic and they are in the military, they are the most satisfied people compared to other people who are other types of personality. If you want to add one more occupation at the top there, next to farmer, you will be in the military. Because again, military, they deal with a lot of tangible items and guns and all that kind of thing. So realistic people would, I found in my research, the people in the military who have the personality trait of realistic tend to be more satisfied compared to people in the military who have other personality traits.
So Doctor, personality job theory is the same as the Holland or different theory?
It's Holland embodies the personality fit theory, yeah? But see, personality fit theory is a whole subject area, and there are many methods within that to measure the fit, and Holland is one of them. One of them, yes. And again, I would caution you against using Holland's model. So that's on personality. So you can see that there are many ways of conceptualizing and measuring personality. And of course, there are many other ways which I haven't talked about here. What are the other personality questionnaires that are often used? Well, if you look at the mental measurements yearbook, that's the book which are with questionnaires that are compiled by psychologists that are viewed to be good in the eyes of the psychologists. So 16PF is one of them. Big Five, I can't remember honestly, but 16PF definitely one of them. There's also the Jackson Personality Research Form. There's a California Personality Inventory and a couple of others. Okay. So that's on personality. On personality, let's look at emotions. This one, I'll just go through quickly. Some studies, they have used emotions as one of the variables for study. Again, gender differences, the study on gender differences have shown that generally women display emotions and feel emotions more intensely compared to men. There are some studies in psychology to show the impact of emotions on decision making. Usually people with highly positive emotions, they tend to make courageous decisions, brave decisions. Whereas people who are in a negative emotional state, they either make very conservative decisions or they don't make any decisions at all. And negative decisions could be like depression, like sadness or depression, or it could be like the anger states. And again, if a person is very angry, they make a different kind of decision. Decision that probably later on they'll regret. Okay. So I don't know whether you all are, any of you are looking at that. So I've gone through quickly on the topic on emotions. But I'll slow down here because, as I mentioned at the start of the class, that emotional intelligence is now one of the popularly researched constructs. The origins were in emotional stability, but Goldman popularized or developed and popularized this concept. There are many studies on emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? Well, again, there are many slight variations of conceptualizations. One of it is made up of 5 dimensions. The first 3, self-awareness, self-management, and self-motivation, are relating to self. And the other 2, empathy and social skills, are how a person relates to other people. And studies have shown that high EI scores, rather than high IQ scores, characterize high performance. There's a study, I think, that has shown that emotional intelligence scores or emotional stability scores are more strongly associated with success as a sales manager compared to IQ scores. Because think about it, right? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to be a sales manager, but you need to have the kind of emotional stability that even though people shout at you or people criticize you, you are still confident and you still have high self-esteem. And again, in leadership, you need to have high emotional intelligence in order to be a leader, a good leader. Because let's face it, there is no leader out there, no matter how successful, that have escaped criticism. Right? In fact, if you don't want to be criticized, don't become a leader. Because if you go up to leader, you can never get 100% people supporting you. There'll be some people who criticize you, and you know. So you must have that emotional intelligence to be able to know who you are and believe what you believe in and go forward despite the criticism around you. Interesting topic. You know, you might want to incorporate this in your research, especially those who are looking at leadership. Oh, so that's the end of that chapter. Any questions on this chapter so far? Right, next topic, values, attitudes, and job satisfaction. What are values? Long definition here. Let me give you the simple definition. Values are whatever that are important to you. Example, love, honesty, integrity, religion, family. These are all examples of values. Something that you believe that is important for you in your life, either in your work life or in your personal life. And value systems is basically a ranking of the values that you have. If I ask you to write down 5 things that you feel are most important, and then after doing that, I ask you to prioritize or select any one of the 5 to be the most important, give that a number 1, which is the second most important, number 2, and so on. Then you will have a value hierarchy or ranking. And obviously, the number 1 value is more important to you than the number 2 or number 5 value. What is the relevance of values in research? Again, in person organization fit. Person-organization fit, values often come in. And how it comes in is this, you know. The question is like, do you value the same things as your organization value? If yes, then you got fit. person-organization fit. If no, that means you got a lower fit.
For example,
So for example, if your organization values innovation and creativity, do try something new. Forget about the past, do something new. And if you're also like that, then you'll be fitting in that organization. But on the other hand, if you are the other type of person, which is you want to be conservative and don't change, then probably you will not fit in that organization. So that's the value system. And if you look up the internet, I've published one research on military values, aligning military values. One of my research papers up there. And this was done with my master's students in the military. And in the Malaysian military, there is like a list of values ranked. And what we did was we got people, the army personnel as respondents, to put what is their ranking, of these 7 values, which one do you think is the most important, which is the second most important, and so on. And what we found out is that when the ranking matches, the extent to which the ranking of the individual soldier matches that of the military, those people have higher satisfaction compared to if the ranking of the values don't match. The reason why I did this was because have you heard of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP?
Yes.
Some of you have heard, right? In the master practitioner module, there is this assumption that the ranking of values are important, right? But no research has been done on it. So I've decided to take some of these elements and do some research. So basically what I have found in my study was that the ranking is important, and the extent to which values, the ranking of the values of the individual match with the organization. If they match, the person is more satisfied. And that's a contribution to literature, because previously most of the research just look at matching, that's all. They don't look at the ranking matches. How can values be measured? Well, there are many ways. I did it the NLP, neuro-linguistic programming way. Rokish did it in a different way, which is to classify terminal values with instrumental values. Terminal values are the values that you want to have near the end of your expected life, and instrumental values are the values that you need to have now in order to obtain your terminal values in the future. So that's all. And different categories of people, like union members, executives, activists, they have different sets of values. And different generations also have different kinds of values. Again, this might be relevant or might not be relevant in your anticipated research. And this is probably one of the most relevant. I think virtually every one of you will be looking at this. Attitudes. What are attitudes? Attitudes, briefly, they are the cognitive, affective, and behavioral component. Let me give you an example of an attitude. The most commonly studied attitude at work is job satisfaction. Is the attitude towards your job as a whole. That means the work that you do, the people that you work with, your colleagues, your supervisor, the promotion policies, and so on, right? And basically your attitude, or any attitudes, are basically made up of 3 components. What you think about it, cognitive, what you feel about it, your affective, and what you intend to behave about it, which is behavior. And like I said, job satisfaction is the most commonly studied attitude at work. And I think one of you mentioned that that's your area of focus. Is job satisfaction the only one, or are there any other attitudes? Well, there's job involvement. And job involvement is more specific in that you're how involved or how engaged you are in your job. There's job involvement. And organizational commitment is how committed are you towards your organization. The key difference between the two is this. If you ask a person, can you tell me about yourself? And if the person says, I am a lawyer, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a professor, then chances are he's more job involved than the organizational commitment. But if the person replies, I say, can you tell me about yourself? The first thing the person says, I work at this university or this bank or this government organization, then probably, I mean, of course, I'm just simplifying things here, probably that person has got higher organizational commitment. Organizational commitment, again, is probably, in my view, the second most popularly studied attitude at work. Organizational commitment, if you look at the literature, it can be broken down to 3 sub-variables. The first one is affective commitment. So when you ask a person, why are you in this job? Then the person says, because I love this job. It's talking about feelings. So that's affective, A-F-F-E-C-T-I-V, affective commitment. The second category is normative continuance. So if you ask a person, why are you in this job? Then the person says, I'm in this job because this is the right thing to do. That's normative commitment. And the third response probably could be, I'm in this job because if I leave, I lose more. So that's continuance commitment. So the three subcomponents of organizational commitment, together they add up to the total organizational commitment. Again, these are popularly studied in organizational behavior. Never mind about this, just forget about this. Attitude surveys, job satisfaction, as I mentioned to you. There are many measures of job satisfaction. The most popular ones are Job Descriptive Index, or JDI. Just write down here. The Job Descriptive Index, or JDI for short. And then there's a Minnesota satisfaction questionnaire. There's a long version and a short version of that. These two probably are the most common satisfaction measures, but obviously they're not the only ones. There are some other measures out there as well.
Job dissatisfaction?
Yeah, Job Descriptive Index. Job Descriptive Index, or JDI. That's the one I use in my thesis as well. I used it in my master's thesis and my PhD thesis. And you'll get reliability more than 0.9, higher than 0.9. Why is satisfaction more popularly studied than performance? It's more of a practical problem, right? Because you're distributing questionnaires to people. And when you ask them about satisfaction, they're more likely to be honest, to write whether they're satisfied or not satisfied at work. But if you ask them a question about their performance, will most people be honest in reporting that level of performance? I would think that people probably have quite not an accurate view of their own performance. So if you give them a question asking them to rate their own performance, there's a danger that you will not get accurate or truthful reports. So you probably have to get performance measures through a third party. like through the supervisor and so on. And the problem with that is that you can get the performance scores from the supervisor relating to employee A and B and C. But later on, when you want to match the responses from the questionnaire that A filled in, most questionnaires are anonymous. They don't write their names down, so how are you going to match? There's a problem there. No? So that's why performance, it's important to study about performance, but the practical aspect is that it's difficult to obtain performance measures to be included in studies. So that's why a lot of studies, they don't look at performance, but they look at satisfaction, organizational commitment, and organizational citizenship behavior. Just before we finish, absenteeism and turnover. Turnover is the intention to resign. You all know that. And studies have shown that although there's an unclear relationship between satisfaction and productivity, there is, however, a relation between satisfaction and absenteeism and turnover intentions. Skip this. Okay. And the last one, organizational citizenship behavior. How is that different from organizational commitment? Well, it's different, right? And what OCB, organizational citizenship behavior, is, it's basically about the behavior which is beyond the requirements of the job. Whether a person is willing to engage in behaviors outside of their job description. Example, like to train new employees. It's not in the job description, but they are willing to take time out to train new employees. And maybe do things which are outside of their job function, appear in talks in other departments within the organization. So basically, that's what organizational citizenship behavior is. And my PhD student, she's found that in organizations or hotels where they've got favorable human resource policies, there is a greater likelihood that the frontline staff are willing to do things which are beyond their job description. So that's the motivation for the organization to make sure that their HR policies are fair and supportive. And that's the end of that slide. So we've covered some key attitudes at work, which I can say that probably half of this class will be looking at. Job satisfaction, or organizational commitment, or organizational citizenship behavior. These, I'm sure, one of these three, virtually 80 or 90% of you will be looking at. Are there any other variables which are not here? Well, what my PhD students currently is looking at employee engagement, and that's another fairly recent. It's similar to job involvement, but maybe with slightly different subconstructs and all that. Employee engagement, how passionate are they about their jobs? So employee engagement is another one of them. And this is it. So job satisfaction. Now, one of you have mentioned that you want to look at job satisfaction. Just like what happened with my current student, he said he wanted to look at job satisfaction. I said, good, that's a good starting point. Because of this, job satisfaction probably has been researched since the last 40 years. So if you just want to look at job satisfaction as a construct at the doctoral level, probably that will not do anymore. You've got to look at probably what are the antecedents or the variables that impact job satisfaction. And finally, what he decided to do was he was looking at the PE fit model, a modified version of the PE fit model to help explain job satisfaction at work. And I think he's on the right track now. So, I mean, perception and individual decision making. Perception, well, okay. This is mainly, I would say, like psychological research. If any of you doing consumer behavior, this might be relevant for those who intend to do their thesis in the area of consumer behavior, which is actually psychology in a marketing context. How people perceive advertisements, for example. Why are some advertisements more effective than the others? How do you make advertisements more effective that engage the listener or the audience and encourages them to buy? These are the things that... Anyone looking at? Okay, if not, I'll just skip this. Basically, the factors in the perceiver and factors in the situation and factors in the target that together in combination, they result in a certain perception that results in the person's desire to buy or not to buy. Attribution theory, we'll skip about this. Errors and biases in attributions. Sometimes this is examined in the context of interviews. What kinds of biases happens in interviews, job interviews, and which ones are the more prevalent and which ones are the more damaging and affecting the accuracy of the interview results. It is a short description about this. The self-fulfilling prophecy or Pygmalion effect. The lower or higher performance of employees reflects preconceived leader expectations about employee capabilities. Let me just tell you about a small research, a research that was done in the area of education. There's a teacher, and then there's a class. This is education in the school, and the teacher was told that sorry, in this class your students are not very bright. Unfortunately, we don't have a special needs teacher, so I guess you're stuck with them. Just do the best you can, and that's it. So and what they found was that at the end of the year, the performance of the students weren't very good, even though they were average students. The performance wasn't very good because the teacher believed in his or her mind that they were not good students. And then in the following semester, the same teacher was told, oh, you're so lucky that in this other class, you've got the brightest students, the brightest students in the county, for example, and you're so fortunate. And they found that at the end of that semester, or at the end of the year, the performance of the students was so much better, even though the students were average. So the only difference was that in the minds of the teacher, what the teacher believed, the teacher actually actualized in the performance of the students. And that's very significant in that what the research shows is if the teacher, whatever the teacher believes, that belief somehow is transferred either consciously or unconsciously to the students, and the students adopt that belief, and then the students adopting that belief will actualize that behavior to be consistent with that belief. So that was an interesting study done in the field of education, and it has been talked about in a lot of motivational courses. Motivation, let's look at motivation. Now, so let's have a look at some definitions of motivation. It's a process that accounts for an individual's intensity, direction, and persistence of effort towards attaining a goal. And the three components: intensity, how hard a person tries. And the person cannot say he's motivated if he's not trying very hard, if the intensity is not there. There has to be a direction towards something, or maybe away from something. Yeah. And persistence. A person cannot say he or she is motivated if the first problem that comes, they give up. They have to try and try again. So that's the definition of motivation. One of the earliest theories of motivation is the Maslow's theory, often criticized nowadays, but still fairly useful. But let me talk about the methodology. Probably that's more relevant to a doctoral program. Okay? So Maslow, what he did was, he's a psychologist, and he has clients, or rather can call them patients, people who are not not really well upstairs.
Mentally
Maybe not quite there yet. But he has about 200 of these, approximately 200 of these patients or clients, people that he sees, and he noticed that there are certain patterns that exist among his clients. And basically he noticed that there were 5 needs, and that these needs were arranged in a particular hierarchy, and then he came up with this model. As far as I know, Maslow, he came up with this theory more like in a very, it's not an empirical way, not by distributing questionnaires, it's very much qualitative. Very much qualitative research. So perhaps nowadays it's a bit difficult for you to do research entirely qualitatively and in the area of organizational behavior. In corporate strategy, you can still do a lot of qualitative studies and a lot of qualitative studies in the area of strategy. But in organizational behavior, most studies nowadays are empirical, meaning there's questionnaires, you collect data, put it through SPSS, and churn out the results and make your analysis from there. Maslow, at that time, this is a long time ago, he did his, came up with this theory entirely in a qualitative way. But I think from now, it's difficult for you to do that. Yeah, there's no. Again, I want to talk about this one here, Herzberg's theory. Again, it's often talked about in OB class, but in the doctoral class, I want to talk about the methodological issues. So the main objection to, well, let me tell you how Frederick Taylor and Frederick, it's as if Herzberg, Mosner, and Sniderman, it was 3 people. What they did was they went around 200 accountants and engineers, and they asked them, okay, what makes you satisfied in your work and what makes you dissatisfied in your work? Yeah? And they noticed that there's a certain pattern when people were asked what makes you satisfied, they tend to say, oh, it's because of the work, achievement, recognition, work, responsibility, all that. And when asked what makes you dissatisfied at work, they point to other factors, and usually these factors are all pointing outside them.
Yeah.
Like my boss, the company, the work conditions, my pay, my co-workers, they're all problems. So it's pointing outwards, right? Okay.
But this is depends on the year of experience or just from the
No, my point is this. When asked these questions, the people came up with these answers. Now, the point is this, the objection to Herzberg's theory is the methodology. And first of all, he only did his research among engineers and accountants. Why ignoring the rest of the people? Engineers and accountants, they are perhaps a unique lot of people. Okay, they might be different from other kinds of people in other occupations. That's number one. And number two, probably the most important here, from your perspective as doctoral students, the way in which the data was collected, the way in which the questions were asked, was such as to encourage a bias, a self-serving bias. Because when we ask a person what makes you satisfied in your job, they tend to talk about either themselves, like the recognition, achievement. Oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can become a better person. All very biased responses. And what makes you dissatisfied? Then they say, oh, it's my boss. I can perform well, but my boss, makes it difficult for me to do that. Or I can do well, but unfortunately the organization, the policies, they are straight-jacketing me. I don't have the freedom to do this, and always pointing outwards. So remember this: when you have, when you're proposing a study that requires collecting information, you have to ask yourself: is there a high potential of bias that will make your results totally, not in the direction that you anticipate? So that's what you got to bear in mind. That's the reason why I'm talking about Assoc here. Not from the point of view of like teaching a master's or undergraduate student, but I'm talking about the methodology here, especially in relation to trying to get information from the respondents, information which could be regarded as sensitive and which could be distorted because of the self-serving bias of the respondent. Be careful about that when you want to propose, we want to do that kind of research. Equity theory and Vroom's expectancy theory, these are the more sophisticated models that have evolved. And until today, there's still research in the area of equity theory. It is still ongoing in the area of equity theory. I published research a couple of years ago based on this, on equity sensitivity. I've combined equity theory with the personality trait of sensitivity. Equity theory basically says that when people perceive unfairness, they are dissatisfied. Okay? That's the basic model. But I took it one step further by saying that, yes, whenever there's inequity, people become dissatisfied, but the dissatisfaction is greater for people who are highly sensitive compared to the very hardy people. People with the hardy people, they put them in unfair environments, they're okay with it, or they just tolerate it. But the highly sensitive people, they feel a lot of injustice and feel dissatisfied being in that kind of environment. So equity theory, as I found out, you can still have further distinctions in that field. So that's what research is all about. Somebody said something a few years ago. Yes, you can make use of that, but how can you make the model more sophisticated? How can you go deeper into that theory? So that's what doctoral programs are all about. If everything is already finalized, there will be no more doctoral students, no more PhD students. But the world is becoming more and more complex. We're going deeper and deeper into it, and that's why we've got all these theses. And expectancy theory, it's the expectancy theory is basically about 3 ingredients which are required in order a person to feel motivated. If any one or more of those ingredients or those criteria are not met, then the person will feel less motivated. For example, like the effort to performance, a person must believe that if they put in the effort, they will be able to achieve the target. And the second ingredient is that they must believe that if they achieve the performance, they will get the reward. And the third one is the rewards are what they want. Like for example, if you want to be the employee of the year, that is important to you, you get it, you are motivated. But if it's not important to you, then you will not be motivated to achieve whatever target, because you say the award is meaningless. So all three ingredients need to be met in order for a person to feel motivated. And maybe, I don't know, you can find some finer distinctions in this theory. And performance is actually a combination of motivation, ability, and opportunity. With these three, then you can have performance. If any one of the three ingredients are missing, then the person cannot perform. You can have a very motivated person, but if that person doesn't have the ability or isn't given the right opportunity, the person cannot succeed. But of course, you can argue the other way around, that with motivation, the person could develop that ability. If it is a skill that needs to be practiced, the motivated person will develop that ability, and you will somehow find an opportunity to be successful. And this diagram here, the point is that all these personality theories are like snapshots. They're snapshots of the entire view. So, just like you have the scenery, and then you have got a camera with a very narrow field of view. You don't have one of these wide view ones, you got a narrow view. And then you take a snapshot here, you take a snapshot there, a snapshot there. Well, each snapshot picture is a true picture, but an incomplete picture of the whole thing. So by taking these theories here and there, everywhere, by combining them, then you have a better view of the whole thing. And let me tell you about the more current trend. Let me tell you first of all about the trend like 30, 40 years ago. 40 years ago or beyond, earlier than that, it's okay to conduct a research between two variables. One independent variable and one dependent variable. 40 years ago, you can do that, right? But as the years go by, you need to have more sophisticated models. And if we look at what has been going on in the last 5 years, you'll see a conceptual framework that has more than 12 boxes up there. There's so many variables that the researcher is examining, and that's the current trend nowadays, to look at more variables, because up to a certain point, more variables give you a more complete picture as opposed to just a few variables. But of course, obviously, there's a limit, because if you give a person a questionnaire, that thing, no one will fill up the questionnaire. So you have to be realistic to have the balance between number of variables and also number of questions measuring each variable, and to have a complete view or more complete view of the situation that you are trying to examine. So this is like combining all the different personality, all the different motivation theories together.